have. On top of that, one of the things that we do know is that intelligence and academic achievement do not seem to predict school refusal. Oftentimes people think, oh, it's that kid who doesn't do well in school, they struggle, they get poor grades, so they just don't want to come to school. A lot of times it's very high achieving students. A lot of the cases that I've worked with in practice have been kids who are incredibly gifted, kids who could be almost advanced the grade. And there's just some other underlying thing that really makes them not want to go to school and really have trouble doing that. Now we couple all of that knowledge with the pandemic we're in. So some of the things that I've been working with families on and speaking to other professionals about, in regards to who could possibly be school avoidant, are families who are worried about their children getting sick. I was meeting with a family today that, the child that I work with is okay, but he has a sister with a pretty serious medical illness. So they're really worried about sending their kid to school, and most likely going for that online option. Students are uncomfortable with their appearance on screen, whether that's because they have some sort of body dysmorphia, whether they just have some self-esteem issue, they don't like the way they look. Maybe that kid it was easy to hide in the classroom. They could sit in the back. Maybe it's that kid who was often getting yelled at for having their hoodie up. Now it's kind of hard. We're very much in each other's faces in a real way when that's all you see through this little pinhole. I work with a lot of cases who have tics or Tourette's, and those kids sometimes do really well in school because, again, they can kind of hide. That's really hard, when your face is blown up on the screen and it's jumping to you all the time, every noise you make. Sometimes we're going to have students who don't have the required technology, or maybe they have the hardware, but they don't have good internet connection. Or maybe they have to share devices in the home because there's multiple children. That's going to create some school avoidance issues. And also, students with siblings. Caregivers are trying to set everyone up and manage everything, and it's easy, if you don't want to participate, to dip out when mom's helping your brother and kind of shut off that screen, and maybe you don't get caught. Maybe mom doesn't know and you get away with a little bit of school avoidance there. So I think these are all things that are much more complicated now and make it incredibly more difficult when we're really thinking about who could possibly be school avoidant and also how we can help them. The impacts of school avoidance, obviously suffering in grades, suffering in social functioning, which I'm very worried about right now, due to the lack of social skills that kids are able to work on remotely. It creates a lot of family conflict. Caregivers are very upset with their children for not going to school. It often leads to dropout and often leads to future unemployment or problems at work. If it's from an anxiety perspective, if school is an anxiety-provoking thing and you avoid it, you start to learn, oh, something gets hard, I don't do it, and then I feel better. Work oftentimes for people is hard. I know it is for me, especially now in the era of COVID and trying to schedule and plan and figure things out. If you don't have some resiliency or some skills or some of those paces that Maureen was talking about, it's going to be even more difficult. So we really need to be mindful of what the future impacts can be. So when we talk about school avoidance, I always go back to what is the underlying function. This study obviously was pre-COVID, but in looking at it, the number one function was tangible reward. So I get something by not attending school. I don't go to school and I get to play Xbox all day. It's kind of the classic example. Very close in numbers to that is escaping stimuli that provoke negative feelings. So I'm worried about school, I don't go to school, I don't have to be worried. That's that vicious anxiety circle like I just spoke about. Sometimes it's attention seeking, almost a little bit less than a quarter of the time. So I don't go to school and I get to hang out with mom or dad or a caregiver all day. Or I've got a sibling at home, and so I don't go to school and I get to hang out with my baby brother or sister. Sometimes that comes into play. And, there is a small percentage of kids who just don't want to deal with a social evaluation or can't deal with that social evaluation. So if I don't go to school, no one will judge me. Oftentimes, these are more of those students who struggle academically. They don't want to be seen as dumb because they can't do the work or they're struggling, and possibly there's an underlying learning disability or something going on. What's really interesting to me about this in kind of surveying a lot of other professionals that I know about these numbers and getting some feedback from people, I don't know that much of this is actually going to change with remote learning. I think that kids will still not want to do remote learning because they want to do something else. They want that tangible. I think that remote learning does cause some anxiety, and if I don't do it, I can escape it. I think that if I don't do remote learning, parents and caregivers are going to pay a lot of attention to me to try and get me to be back on my remote learning. and a social evaluation. You know, now really all eyes are on you when you're that one person on the screen. So if anything, I might predict that that might go a little bit up. But overall, I don't really see much of a change in this, but I am interested, you know, as studies come out, you know, if it will change. So we know what the problem is. Let's talk about how to fix it, because that's why we're all here tonight, right? So the number one thing is self-care. You know, if you're not taking care of yourself, there's no way that we're going to be able to help our students, which is incredibly difficult with the nature of the jobs that we all have. So let's just go right to that next slide. So besides self-care, one of the other things I'm always very cautious about is not believing the hype. So, you know, it's hard, you know, when you hear from a prior teacher or a case manager or someone else in the building, oh, you're going to have Johnny in your class this year. Oh, Johnny's really school avoidant. Johnny never comes to school, and it's a real problem. That kid's already starting off down, you know. I would hope that we can all come together, especially in this time, to give each and every kid a clean slate, you know, and really try and give them the benefit of the doubt. And maybe Johnny is school avoidant, but let's figure out what we can do about it versus just getting caught in the rumor mill and starting to blame Johnny or Johnny's parents and start passing judgment on them. So, you know, let's throw it out to you guys. What do you think is the most challenging aspect of school avoidance?
I went ahead and launched the poll. You guys can indicate what you think, and if you want to suggest something else to Matt, you can go ahead and put it in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Matt, we have about half of the people answered. I'm going to give them another 10 seconds.
Sure.
All right, so I'm going to wrap that up. I'll show the results. There you go. You've got that on your screen, right?
All right. Yes, I do. Thank you. So consistency with students, number one. Let's see what else we have here. Resistance from teachers, guardian buy-in, big one, and how to define avoidance in online students. Great. Okay. Yeah, I think we're going to hit all of that. Perfect. So let's talk about student engagement. This is the number one thing I think that we can all work on when we're talking about school avoidance. If you don't have a relationship with that kid and that kid has no reason to want to be in school, why are they going to be there? So we need to really work and understand why they're avoidant, number one, and then advocate for their needs. Really important with this is not promising anything that you can't deliver. You know, if you promise this kid, well, we'll be able to work this out, you can only come to class a couple times a week instead of every day or whatever the case may be, and then you find out from an administrator like, that's not going to work, you've lost all hope and trust with that kid, and it's going to be very, very hard to overcome that. So, you know, I caution everyone with that to just be very careful and always make sure that you're under-promising and over-delivering. One of the things that I have found tremendously successful with students who are school avoidant is getting them involved in some sort of project or club or sport or activity. That's going to be really hard, you know, in this era, COVID era. One thing that I'm doing some research in myself is esports, so video game clubs, video game teams. New Jersey does now have a lot of teams at the middle school level and high school level and some clubs at the elementary level. And if anyone's interested in that, they can certainly reach out to me. My email will be at the end. But that's the type of thing where kids don't need to physically be present. They can do it from their homes, just like remote learning, versus other types of sports where they may need to be there, or other types of clubs where they may need to come in. But it's not the only thing. There are a lot of things that I think we can get creative and do, and that's also going to be very important in how to be creative. So the other thing that came up, you know, on the poll was the guardian engagement. One thing that I have found very interesting in my work with people who are school avoidant and families is that oftentimes parents and guardians think they're the only ones. You know, my kid's the only kid that's ever been this way. In reality, it's not all that uncommon. There's certainly different varying degrees of how school avoidant kids are, and I've worked with kids who haven't gone to school for 2 years, and I've worked with kids who haven't gone to school for 2 days. You know, so the big point here is that they're not alone. You know, there are other people out there, and that we're going to be there to support them. One thing I think we really need to do is look at what we're asking parents and guardians to do with virtual learning, and is this reasonable? You know, even if a parent is a teacher, is it their job to teach their children? That's really hard. That's really hard for us to kind of figure out as school professionals about how to navigate this new world and this new system. But looking out and asking those parents, like, okay, seems like the kid hasn't been in school for a couple days. How's that going? Is there anything we can do to help you? How's the virtual learning? Do we need help? Sometimes it's as simple as parents don't even know how to navigate the computer systems that we're asking them to use. And if they did, they would have a better chance of getting their kid involved. Also, parents have a hard time holding their child accountable sometimes. In those cases, we really need to work on bolstering their support, and giving them resources and partnering with them so that they can hold their child a little bit more accountable. Because ultimately, the kid's not there. When I'm doing teletherapy, if that kid decides to walk away from the screen, there's not much I can do about it. So working with parents on how we're going to manage that situation, a lot of that comes down to communication. If the parent doesn't know the kid's not showing up, how could they ever possibly hold the kid accountable? So if you've got a kid that's been there every day and all of a sudden they miss a couple days, it's time to send an email or call and try and reach out. I really advocate for a team approach because this is a tremendously time-consuming type of job. Anytime you're working with a student who's school avoidant, and anyone who's done this work will tell you that one case can take up all the time you have. So you really need to rely on teams and trying to work it with everyone. When I think about teams, I think of parents as kind of the case manager and keeping the school informed about what's going on at home, doing some data collection, and working to get that child either on the screen or to the school. There are cases where someone from the school can reach out and go to the home potentially, but ultimately, we have to work on helping parents do that. Schools, can work on creating plans, again, based on that function. This may mean that we have an increase in IEPs and 504s, and I know that nobody wants to hear that because it's more work for all of us. With that, for all the administrators on the call, really think about what you're asking your staff to do, and is it reasonable? Just like we're asking, is it reasonable for what we're asking parents to do? So if we want child study team members and SACs and guidance counselors and school nurses to be doing wellness checks on people and also getting all their testing done and also writing all their IEPs and also scheduling meetings when we can't really hold meetings, something's going to have to give here. So we really need to think about that. The other thing I've seen a lot of times is a lot of these kids have underlying learning issues. So that does get tricky, and that often leads to needing an assessment. You can certainly try and get parents to utilize a private therapist for underlying mental health concerns and community mental health resources. I know that, again, that gets tricky from a school approach of, giving a parent a name of a provider. Oftentimes what I have done in practice is I just have a list of names of people in the area that the team feels are effective, and I kind of tell the parents, these are other professionals that other parents have told us have helped their children. We're not endorsing anybody. Here's a list of people that we just know other parents have used and have said have been helpful. And I think that's a really nice way to give that information. One thing, again, I'm very cautious on is discipline, and I've seen where this has really gone wrong for schools. When we start calling police and DCPNP out to homes and kind of taking that more hardline approach. Most parents, if they could get their kid to go to school or they could get their kid on the call, would do it. I very rarely come across a situation where the parent isn't really trying. And in those cases, I would say maybe the call to DCPNP or the police is warranted. But I think oftentimes, there are better people to help with this, people with mental health backgrounds, school social workers, psychologists, SACs, guidance counselors, nurses, etc. Again, that's really hard to do if you have 18 IEPs to write every day and 43 test cases built up and everything else. So we have to really find ways to get creative and not overburden these people, but also let them do the job they've been trained to do and let them use the skill set that they really have. I think it would be a much better approach, and you would have better outcomes if we were able to use the people that know how to do the job versus the threatening and the disciplining. Again, there's always school laws and policies and rules that we have to follow, and I'm not advocating to go against any of those. I'm just asking people to be mindful of can we be a little bit more supportive and helpful as a first line approach instead of going to the discipline as the first line approach. Again, school plans come into play. You know, it certainly could be a formal or informal plan, whether that's INRS, 504s, IEP. It's helpful to have a case manager. And if it's not a formal plan, you know, assign a point person. Who's going to be ultimately responsible for this? Think about who the child can connect with. Oftentimes, it's not who you think it is. I've had kids have great relationships with custodians, or the person who works in the lunchroom, because that's the person that they talk to the most, that they see the most. You know, I've set up plans where kids got to check in with a custodian every day because they just liked Mr. John, and, you know, it really got that kid to come to school. So think about those things. Again, creativity is key here. I'm always very upfront in these cases with expectations and policies, because those are things where we have a lot less wiggle room. But always aim high and, you know, start small and work your way up to it. And with that, think about some is more than none. So if we can get the kid to come in for a couple minutes who was never coming to school, that's a win. If they can get them to come in for half a day when they never made it for half a day, that's a win. The problem here is when we try to go from 0 to 100. 0 being the kid never showed up to school, and 100 that kid's there every minute that they're supposed to be. It's not going to happen. It's baby steps. You know, I've gone so far to have to write plans where we started with the kid literally just driving by the building in the parent's car a couple times. And then it was, okay, now you're just going to drive through the parking lot. Okay, now you're going to drive and you're going to sit in the parking lot. Okay, now you're going to take literally a step out of the car and you can keep one hand in the car. Now you're going to touch the school door, really working your way up. As I say that, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking like, oh my goodness, how time consuming this can be. And it absolutely is. That's key and critical here. Again, that's why we need to find ways to get the people who know how to do this type of work the time that they need in order to be able to do it. Also really think about changing the environment. You know, if it's in person and the kid's a little bit embarrassed about what they look like, or it's overwhelming to come in the main entrance because there's too much chaos, can they come in a back entrance or a back door? A lot of times, you know, I'm writing letters for kids right now about being able to have their screen off. And I know a lot of teachers want the screen on, but again, some is more than none. So if the kid comes to class but has the screen off, I would argue that's a lot better than the kid becomes school avoidant because they're being told they have to keep their screen on the whole time. Think about alternative assignments. A lot of times these cases go really well if you can work in some project-based learning, that passion project, that thing that that kid really loves. I've had cases where, you know, the student was really into Frisbee golf, so we got him to write a whole program proposal to the town to have a Frisbee golf course, and then he worked his way into school, and once he did, and he met some criteria, we were able to get some Frisbee golf equipment through our PE budget, and that really got that kid to come to school because he knew every day at lunch he could go out and do that. Options to talk with a support person. Again, get creative about who that may be. Providing reinforcement in whatever way that may be, and also, again, really trying to support that parent because they are going to be a key player in the whole system here. With reinforcement, like I said before, you always want to find a way to earn. You know, the mistake that gets made sometimes is it's an all or nothing. Either you make it to school or you don't, so you earn or you don't earn. And then what happens is most of these kids are smart enough to figure out, okay, well, I didn't make it to school on time, so I'm not going to earn what I'm working towards. There's no reason to show up to school. So when you set up a plan like I have here, where if you make it on time, you get more, you get the most, and you work your way all the way down to, hey, if you make it to 5 minutes, you still get something. You get to save face and you get a little something. That's going to be much, much more successful than saying, all right, you've got to make it a half a day, or you've got to make it the full day. Because again, if you've lost it in the morning, what's your motivation to show up in the afternoon?
Thank you, Matt.
Welcome.
I appreciate you sharing all that with us today. You know, fire eating and dealing with school avoidance are both tough jobs. I think, though, that Matt gave us some great tips on how to make the impossible seem just a little bit more possible today. At least I hope so. So moving on to our clowns. Let's bring in those clowns for a little bit and see how they're doing. This one is another Brian Andreas. Make sure you've got clean underwear, she always said, in case you get in an accident. And I always figured that would be the least of my worries, but now I'm older and I see it as a lot you can't control, and clean underwear is one of the ones you can. With that, we're going to direct our attention back to ring number 1. Our juggler is ready for us, I think.
I am back to juggling.
All right, Maureen, can you take it away?
I sure can. I am going to talk with you just a little bit about suicide risk and variety of other risk behaviors for your younger kids. And how I wanted to start was give us a definition of suicide. I think that, you know, when we all operate from the same page, it's easier. And this is a behavioral definition that makes it much easier to talk about suicide. You can use this across the lifespan, but it works particularly well with children. And the definition is that suicide is an attempt to solve a problem of intense emotional pain with impaired problem-solving skills. So I want you to pay attention to that, because we're going to look at that, and you can see that it already tells you questions that you can ask a child. Gee, what's going on in your life right now that makes you feel so terrible you wish you were dead? That's going to give you what that problem is. It's a much more effective way to get information than asking a kid, why do you want to die? I've had kids tell me they've been asked that question. Usually when they answer, it's because I don't want to live. So what's going on in your life right now that makes you feel that way is a much, much better way to begin to get information to help a child. I wish we didn't have to talk about elementary school suicide. I truly, truly, you know, when I started in this field many years ago, even talking about suicide in junior high was something that was a little scary. And now, unfortunately, we know that 8% of 9 and 10-year-old children report having suicide ideation. The other thing that's a little bit scary about this is that we do see expressions of suicide in kids as young as 4 to 6 years old. And there was some research that was done that showed that the kids who were in this age group who expressed suicidal thoughts and behaviors, they had a better understanding of what it meant to die than the majority of their peers. I think we always used to think, well, they can't understand mortality, so how could they possibly understand what they're doing? And the point is, these kids really get what it's like to not want to be. The thing that is another grave concern is the attempt rate increasing for 10 to 14-year-old girls. That was the highest rate group that we saw in youth, and it went up 200% in the years 99 to 2014, which is when the last survey was done. Probably a lot of that was the decreasing age of puberty. I don't have to tell you all about that. We know that there's some studies that 25% of African American girls go through early puberty in the second grade. So, you know, it's a major concern because that's when a lot of emotional problems start. We know that kids can be impacted by the suicide of someone that they know. And I want to always end on some good news, is that you can encourage factors that can protect children even early on. I want to show you now, let's see if I put that off of there. I want to show you just some data that lets you look at younger kids versus that early adolescence. You can see the rate, and we're all familiar with that per 100,000 people rate from COVID, that 12 to 14-year-olds have a 5.18 per 100,000 rate of deaths by suicide. Younger kids have 0.17. Those are the 5 to 11-year-olds. So it is much smaller. The most common diagnosis that we see in those younger kids is ADD or ADHD. As they move into adolescence, we begin to see more depression and we see more anxiety. I would say that I think that some of that ADD, ADHD has also got some anxiety mixed in with it. Oftentimes, these younger kids don't leave a note because it's much more impulsive, and some of them don't write. The relationship problems they have are usually with close family, close friends, sometimes bullying. And as kids get older, even in that 12 to 14-year-old bracket, the problems they're having are with peers like boyfriends, girlfriends, that sort of thing. Being exposed to the death of a peer is a risk factor for older adolescents. It's less of a risk factor for these younger kids because they're less likely to be exposed to the death of a peer. And again, they have less cognitive ability to carry out that fatal plan. So what they do tends to be more impulsive, jumping in front of cars, jumping out of windows. The thing that's good news in this, though, is that both age groups, the 5 to 11 and the 12 to 14, are equally as likely to tell someone else about their suicidal thoughts. So if you ask them, almost 30% of kids will tell you what's going on. And they may even tell you if you don't ask them. This is where they're often telling peers. So I think that that's a really, really important good thing. Because it kind of works into some of the myths that we have about suicide. And one of them is if we talk about it, are we going to plant the idea in a child's mind? Is it like you say to them, you know, why do you want to die? I never thought of that before, but gee, that's a great idea. It's not going to happen. Usually what happens when kids are thinking about things like that, it is such a major relief to have someone in their life who is willing to ask them about it and talk to them about it, that there's a great lessening of initial anxiety. So we know that the talking is not like mind control. You can't plant the idea. We also know that oftentimes people think, well, oh, they're just talking about suicide because they want attention. I will say to you, yeah, they probably do. And isn't it a good thing that they're talking about it instead of acting on it? It's like people who are drowning who yell, help! That's the deal. They're asking for help. They need attention. It's the very, very same thing. I think if you can think about it that way, it diffuses some of the feeling that they're manipulating you. Most suicides happen without warning. No, we usually have some kind of thing that we see, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the warning signs in just a little bit. And do suicidal children need to be in psychiatric hospitals? Some do, but the large majority do not. As you know, in mental health, the rule is the least restrictive treatment setting, and the least restrictive treatment setting for most kids is to be home. Now, that doesn't mean they don't need extra support, and they don't need extra support from the school, but they often don't need to be in a psychiatric hospital. Kids are challenged to describe. Remember, we talked about that definition, and we talked about it's a problem that causes intense emotional pain. Kids are challenged to describe intense emotional pain, younger children. And again, most of us, when we were young, I don't know if we had a very good vocabulary of feelings. So the expectation of that may be a little bit too much. The kinds of things they tell us, my life sucks, I can't do anything right, I'd rather be dead, I hate myself, no one likes me. Even though those are not necessarily feelings, you can sort of extrapolate to the feelings that they're talking about. The same thing happens with those unsolvable problems, although they do a much better job of telling you what they are. And the problems that these kids often talk about and that we see in studies is kids getting in trouble at home, at school, or with friends. Oftentimes bullying was one of the things that I heard younger kids talk about a lot, that they had been bullied and maybe what they did was push back and they were the ones who got in trouble. Kids talking about how they hate school and they're stupid. And there bears no resemblance necessary to reality, as what Matt was telling you just a little bit ago, but that's kind of how they feel. I can't concentrate. Again, think about that chronic stress and its impact on the brain. They're not joking. They can't. They can't read. They can't retain anything. My best friend is gone. I'm just lost. So some kind of loss, and I think those kids who are coming back to school who've had some sudden loss because of COVID are kids you're going to have to really, really watch out for. And then the other problem I've heard kids talk about, and it's really an expression of their anxiety, is that everything scares me. I'm just frightened all the time. When we take a look at the common warning signs for suicide, and we organize these around the acronym FACTS, for feelings, actions, changes, threats, and situations. Now, these are most likely going to be things the teachers in your school are going to identify. They're going to be with the kids most of the time, and they'll see this. And again, we're going to recommend that you do some presentations for them to help them understand what to look for. The thing on here that I think is important to look at is that changes. And it's going to take a while to figure out, especially if you're coming back in an online format, what changes look like. So you're going to have to really kind of pay attention to that. And what we recommend when you're doing training in your school is that you don't just throw these things out to your teachers, but you give them examples. And because what you want them to give you when they're referring a child to you is a behaviorally specific example of what's worrying them. It's to say, I'm worried about this kid. Oh, doesn't tell me anything. I'm worried about this child because they look like that, they're always going to start crying. You can't pay attention. They get irritable really, really quickly. They don't seem to be able to sit in their seat for longer than 2 minutes. They haven't been able to complete assignments. Very, very specific and behavioral behaviors. So that, again, it's much easier when you have to talk to parents to give them specific behaviors, when you have to talk to the child, when you give them specific things they're worried about, as opposed to saying, we're concerned about you. That really tells you nothing. Some of the warning signs, though, that you want to take a look out for in school. And again, these are going to be tricky because, if you're online, but with younger kids, obviously those frequent visits to the school nurse, and it's, those somatic complaints they have. Oftentimes younger children are, as you know, are better able to tell you what feels bad in their body than what feels bad in their spirit or their heart. Frequent restroom requests are really, really important to pay attention to. I've just seen so many kids who absolutely struggle, especially those middle school kids who would ask to go to the bathroom, go in a bathroom stall and take a pencil and scratch at their wrists or sit in there and cry. So I think it's really paying attention to kids who need to be excused a lot. When you might also take a look at not just actual threats or suicide notes, but those themes in school assignments, anything that looks strange, and oftentimes they're just doodling. The other thing I will tell you is I was always surprised when I would go in and teach classes on this with kids. And way back in the day, we would ask them to write about things that were stressful in their lives. This was back in the 1980s, so it is way back in the day. And I was always so surprised by how many kids would write about things that really made them think about suicide. So kids will tell you this stuff if you ask them. That the thing that's listed on the bottom of this page, I think, is one of the most important. It's concerns expressed by other students, and it doesn't necessarily have to be their friends. We were in a school where we were working with, it was in the aftermath of a death by suicide, and a lot of the, popular kids, it was a popular kid who died, and a lot of the popular kids were saying, we're worried about so-and-so. And this was not a child who was popular, was not someone they were friends with. They said, could you please talk with him because we think that, he may think about this. So it's, again, giving kids permission to take care of each other. And those of you who have the lifelines in your school know that that's what we really teach your kids, is how to do that. Warning signs, other warning signs, it may be some of that changes in their grooming, in their weight. That may be one that in particular, as they come back to school, you may notice that they don't quite look the same. It may be in just that they look sad. That change in eating habits, you're hardly going to see at all. And so that may be just the way they look. And again, that bullying behavior is important to note. And even as a bystander, we know that anybody involved in the bullying equation is at a more elevated risk for suicide. But what you want to do is you want to know, what is your protocol in your school for documenting this? So you need to go take a look at, if we notice any of these warning signs, how do we document it? What are the forms that the teachers use? Because you want this documented. If they're making a referral to you, you want to have it in writing. And Lifelines does give you some suggestions for that if you don't have it already as part of your protocol. The online stuff that's trickier. And again, you're going to try to look at some of that participation level, and it may be that you encourage teachers to have those very short conferences, not, like they've always had those parent conferences. Maybe they need short conferences with the students to kind of get a sense of where they are and what they're looking forward to in the next year. And it's really important not to just focus on what isn't working well. You want them to talk about, what are they looking forward to? What are their expectations? What are their goals for the year? What do they want to get right? When you've got an upset student that you're talking to, you know that you always want to have breathing prompts, those kids who are or crying. So you're going to calm them down and you can breathe with them. You always validate their upset. Doesn't matter, big, little, indifferent. I can see you're really upset. And you want to let them know you can't fix an upset feeling, and you can't fix the feeling, I wish I were dead, I want to die. But if they tell you what the problem is, that's something that you can work on together, and you use that together word. And I'm going back to that definition we used. What's going on in your life right now that makes you feel like you'd rather be dead? For my youngest students, I would always have them do a fill sentence completion. I want to die now because, and I never had a kid who couldn't give me 4 or 5 reasons that they were thinking about it. Your trick when you see them is to really help them by letting them vent, and using that magic validation. Now, validation, it sounds easier than it is. And obviously, as you know, you're not agreeing with a kid. You're just saying, I understand how you feel. And you're going to couple that with these 3 magic words of tell me more. These really are magic. How many times, if you think of when you were a kid and you were talking about a problem with an adult and they said, tell me more about that. Usually they said, oh, come on, it's not such a big thing. Oh, what are you so upset about? So kids are not used to hearing this, and it opens the door to whatever is going on in their life to talk about it in a conversational way. And when you put suicide together as a solution to that seemingly unsolvable problem, it's not because I'm a bad person. It's not because I'm stupid. It's not because I hate myself. It's because I have these problems that I don't know how to fix. So what we're going to do, Marnie is going to take us through a little poll. We're going to take a look at how to do some validation.
Absolutely. So these polls really are, you want to just pick one, the answer that you think is most correct. And the first one, it's the student says, my life is over. I counted on getting picked to be on the A team. Everyone's going to laugh at me. Which statement is validating? So just pick which of the 3 statements you feel is the one that offers validation.
None is wrong.
Yes, they're all appropriate responses. Just one is validating. All right, Maureen, we got like 3/4 of people have waited. I'm going to give them another minute. Well, I'm sorry, another 5 seconds, not a minute.
Thank you, Marnie.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up. I'll share with you the results, Maureen. You can take a look.
Okay. Good answers, folks. I kind of agree with most of you that I think the best answer is that sounds like a tough break. And that's the place where you could easily follow it up with tell me more. I think that, let me know if kids laugh and I'll talk to them. That's really kind of trying to fix it. And make it go away, and it takes away the student's agency. Those of you who may have been in any of our other presentations, we've been talking a lot about agency as part of social emotional learning, and the fact that kids need to feel like they have some independence and they can make their own decisions. So I think sometimes taking it away from them, which God knows, I think of my grandchildren and there are times I want to take it away. I know it feels like the end of the world, you can try again next year. Now that's a tricky one because the beginning, I know it feels like the end of the year is really accurate, but think how you might have felt if somebody said to you, I know you couldn't take your vacation this summer. It feels like the end of the world, but you can have a vacation next year. I don't know about you, but next year's a long time away, and kids' sense of time is so proximal that I think if you add that last part on, they're going to feel like you really don't quite understand. So let's take a look at the second one we have here briefly, Marnie.
Yep. Okay. So the second one, the scenario is the student says, my mom is in heaven and I want to be with her. The world is horrible and heaven is great. Which response do you find to be the most validating? They're weighing in, Maureen.
Good.
All right. Very close to everybody there. So I'm going to go ahead. We have a very active group today. I'm going to go ahead and end the polling. I'll share the results. Maureen, you can take a look.
Oh, look at this, 94%. Are you missing your mom? That probably is the most validating thing you could say. I'm glad to see that none of you chose, you think your life is bad at 10. It may be what you want to say. And there are some adults who will say that to kids. And then when it's your time, you'll go to heaven. Yeah, those probably don't work too well. My mother died when I was your age, and I know exactly how you feel. I think that you know, with some kids, that would be the very appropriate thing to say, especially if you know that child. I think the challenge as you start getting into that older middle school group, telling middle school kids you know exactly how they feel, it's like, who do you think you are? You are so old. You couldn't possibly know how I feel. So that it's a little thinner ice there, but I think if you know a kid, you certainly can get away with that. So let's take a look now at some of the things that I know you're not going to say from the answers you just gave to those questions, but you've heard people say these. Oh, come on, don't worry. Everything's going to be all right. By next week, you're going to forget about it. Oh, come on, this is nothing. Cheer up. You have so much to be thankful for. And think about how your family and friends would feel if you killed yourself. Well, now suppose I feel totally worthless, like I am a piece of crap and I am a problem in their lives. I think I'm doing them a favor if I kill myself. So it's important to kind of recognize that these are not the places that you want people to go. You know how to do this, but you may need, you know, sometimes it's important to remind the rest of your staff because, you know, everyone is a little on the last string right now and may not be able to be quite as supportive as they were in the past. So you may have to just remind people. You got to do that job of engaging parents. And I think one of the things that's most critical, you know, when those of you who have been in Lifelines training know, we actually have a whole video on how you engage parents because it is really so hard. And you have to be on the same page. That ventilate and validate is where you really have to be with them. I truly cannot imagine what it's like to hear that your child is suicidal. It's kind of overwhelming. So that's the information that you're giving these parents. So the fact that they may not hear it, they may be resistant, is absolutely accurate. And oftentimes you can gently go into it a little gently with your child doesn't want to live. Your child doesn't think life is worth living. That S word, suicide, can be a trigger for a lot of people. Remind them that you're there to help them and that together you can come up with an action plan and steps for that child and them, because a suicidal child is a problem for the whole family. It's not just a problem for that child, and you're absolutely going to follow up. In terms of virtual considerations, you pretty much do the same thing. The one thing that's really different here is your contact sheet. You need to know what to do if a child drops offline. You need to have ahead of time an idea of who emergency contacts are, not just one, but several, so that if the parents don't respond, you can respond to somebody, you have someone else that you can get in touch with, and you know you have a list you can go down just in case you can't find that child before you get to do a wellness check. So that's probably the most important thing here, as well as checking on those policies and protocols and making sure you develop some for virtual sessions and check-ins. It's really, really important. It's no different than the stuff you had before, and that's why it's consistent, but it's really, really important not to forget that.
And we're back to our clowns, Maureen.
Yep.
So this one, you know, my wish for your deepest desires, she said. And when I asked if they'd come true, she said, they always do. So you might as well get them out in the open while you're still young enough to correct any serious mistakes. I am going to go ahead now and invite you to ring number 3, where we're going to find Defying Gravity, Nicole Diamore Nolan, our tightrope walker. Nicole is a school counselor for pre-K through 8th grade school in Monmouth County. She's also the project director of the Adolescent Suicide Prevention Grant from the Mental Health Association. of Monmouth County and is a Lifeline suicide prevention trainer. Nicole, take it away.
Arnie, how are you? Okay, guys, so I'm super excited to talk to you a little bit about my piece here and my experience in schools and being a Lifelines trainer and all of that. As you notice, everybody else is in costume. I am the tightrope walker, and I really felt that I needed to be that person just because I am a super high anxious person to begin with. And I feel like a tightrope walker, in order to stay alive, has to have the benefit of being a little anxious and knowing when and how to walk that tightrope. So it's a little bit of why I picked that persona tonight for our circus theme. But what I want to talk to you about is our whole school approach and reminding everybody that we're in this together. It's maintaining what we call a competent, caring community, and that's built up of key stakeholders. I'll talk a little bit later about who those key stakeholders are, but this is a program that we've really had a lot of success with. I've done this in some communities here in Monmouth County. It is typically something that we've done before in the past as part of our Lifelines training, and building a competent, caring community has helped us in suicide postvention response. But what we found in researching our programs and having Lifelines really be evidence informed was that this caring, competent community that responded in the aftermath of a traumatic loss or a death of a student or a faculty member actually lended itself in a variety of ways to other school issues. So those included things like the opioid epidemic, Hurricane Sandy. A lot of this comes from some of the work that Maureen has done, after 9/11. And what it's done is really remind us that if we all work together, we can all remember that we're kind of in the same storm. We may be in different boats, but this is really a circus for everybody. And so it takes away a lot of the hostility, and it creates this caring, environment where everybody is concerned about the well-being of one another. Okay, so what is a safe school? A safe and caring school environment is one in which students feel positively connected to others. They feel respected, their work is meaningful, and they're good at what they do. So what we know about safe schools is this is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to create caring school climates where behavioral challenges are decreased. We have school avoidancy numbers and school truancy numbers are down instead of being up. You have less suspensions, you have better grades, you have better graduation rates, all of these different things that are really important for us as schools to consider as part of, building this safe school environment through a competent, caring community. All right, so like I had mentioned before, who are these key stakeholders in our CCC? That's kind of what I call it, the competent, caring community. I abbreviate it CCC sometimes. And so, obviously you have your administrators, you have your faculty, your students, your parents, and the larger community. And what's really nice about the larger community piece is it picks up, where the school day ends off at 3 o'clock. There's a lot of people and parents who sometimes think that the school is responsible for doing everything. But we have our boundaries, and those are rightfully so. We're here for the education of kids, and anything beyond that needs to be picked up and taken care of in the larger community sense. So having that piece as well, creates this overall thing where, parents have their role, administrators have their role, faculty and staff have theirs. The kids really feel like they have a contributing piece to some things that they feel are really, on the forefront of their minds. And then the larger community continues to support our kids and our families with additional resources and other things that our kids can do. So in a competent school community, everyone is concerned about the welfare of all members of its community. They're committed to an environment that supports the common good, and everyone knows how and where to get help if a community member is in need. So this talks about, originally it was suicide, right? So if we had a friend or a student who we thought was at risk for killing themselves, we would know how to ask the question directly, where to go to get help for that person, and how to make sure that they maintained that level of help. This is now extended to other situations. We use the competent community very extensively after Hurricane Sandy. So that meant, if somebody needed a counselor to walk through their house for the first time after seeing some of the devastation of the storm, they knew where and how to get that help, and it was provided in this competent caring model. If there was a student who no longer had clothes or something like that in another community, these are all different types of things that we've worked on and that we've put in place so that schools have this overbranching piece. All right, so now that you know who the key stakeholders are, I think, this year is going to be something that's very different from all the other years that we've been in. And sometimes it's really hard to engage these key stakeholders to begin with. But I want to hear from you, and I want to know which one you think this year is going to be the hardest. So Marnie's got the poll up here. If you guys can just give me some answers. If you think there's other pieces of this or another comment that you would like to have some insight in, go ahead and put that in the chat. I'd be more than happy to talk about this as well. This is always the first step to building the competent community, is deciding who is going to be on that initial roundtable that you pull together.
Oh, we have about 75% of the people. I'm going to give them 5 seconds and I'll wrap it up for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Marnie.
Yep. All right.
And I was very shocked with the answer that we got on Tuesday, which was actually, when we did this with the high school group, they actually said students. And now for me, I always felt that students were the easiest to engage because they're so proactive about wanting to share their voice and having their message heard and being involved. And so I really do agree with you guys, on this one, where I do think parents are going to be the hardest to engage this year for a multitude of reasons. And, Marnie may yell at me, but, if you guys can share some ideas of why parents are going to be specifically hard this year, especially with COVID in the chat, I can speak to that as I go through my slides. But yeah, I think that parents are really going to be hard to engage. I think parents are burnt out. As a mother of 2 myself, I worked through the entire original shutdown. My husband was an essential worker and he was working as well. And just having to balance my own workload along with, my responsibilities as a mother and a home taker, it was just I agree. Lori just said parents are exhausted. We are exhausted. We are burnt out. We are stressed. We don't know how we're going to handle this. And we're trying to keep it the best together that we can. And I think, what Maureen had talked about before, that discussion of chronic stress versus trauma, I think, we're so hyper-focused on the kids, and rightfully so, but we have a lot of parents in our school communities who are going to be facing trauma, who are chronically stressed. They are worried about the mental wellness and the physical wellness of their kids as we move through COVID, and, how they're going to make sure that they're developmentally hitting those milestones as they move through their education. So I agree. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how I'm planning to engage parents throughout this school year, in the competent community model. All right. So how do we do it? How has this worked before in other communities where I've gone in and I've done this work and I've built competent caring communities? So you can see on my slide here, you have the key stakeholders. You have your parents, your administrators, you have your students, and you have your faculty and staff. So one of the first things that we always do is we come in hard with evidence-informed practices and best practice type things, and we do extensive education and training. This is something that we've offered previously through our Lifelines model. We go into schools and we train them, and then we build this larger community piece. And I actually go back in and sit with the crisis teams and the community liaisons, and we work on making sure that everybody knows the best practices when it comes to crisis intervention, grief theory, and all of that stuff. And we make sure that, you're using really evidence-informed practices, things that have been researched to work before, especially now as you guys are experiencing all in these COVID things, all these COVID resources. A lot of people are really throwing around things that we don't know may work. And what we've done really hard on our, webinars here is that we've made sure that we're following a theory base. We're following foundational, modalities and things like that. And we're making sure that everything we do is backed up by some type of research and work that we've done before. This is the first time that our country is kind of really going through a pandemic like this, and we want to make sure that we're doing it in the best way. So really coming at it with, some evidence-informed practices and making sure that everybody's trained in those. Strong communication and inclusion, making sure that everybody feels like they have a place at the table to talk about this stuff. Students are really the most underutilized resource in schools for any type of prevention across the board. We always try to solve the problem for them. This is really what we are as a society, right? We want to be helpers. And instead of allowing the kids to kind of come up with solutions on their own sometimes, we're very quick to say, I think this is going to work for them. I think this is what they should do. And by inviting those kids to the table and asking them, hey, what do you think about this program? What do you think about this curriculum for character development or social emotional learning? Is it working? they give you some insight that you're like, oh, we've never thought about that before, and it really doesn't work that way. And then you get more insightful and meaningful, kind of work that you can do with your kids because it's something that they pick their own. That brings me to my next point, like this opportunity for voice and choice. You have faculty and staff and parents and students, and sometimes we want to assume what those needs are. A lot of the work in the competent community are needs assessments. We have those and we've done them. And I do a lot of data collection with my communities as to what are your specific issues and what are the top 3 things that you want to address. How do you think in your community we can address those instead of, trying to be the outsider coming into a community and guessing what their needs and what their resources are. I let them tell me and we engage in this inclusive piece for a competent community. So what does a competent community look like with COVID, and how can we utilize, stuff that's worked for other crisis situations in the past to work for this one this school year? So it's going to engage the whole community in one common goal. And that common goal for this year is the health and wellness and safety of our students, but also our faculty, right? We have a lot of faculty who are very nervous, and rightfully so, about going back to work. We have a lot of students who are eager to get back to their classrooms and see their friends, but we also have students who are really worried about getting COVID. And if we all come together and kind of come to this assumption, like this piece where we know, hey, this is who this person's worried about, and this is what this person's worried about. It creates that mutual respect, that competent caring model where everybody is concerned about the well-being of others, and it promotes that kind of, I'll take care of me so you can take care of you, and we're all taking care of each other. It has a plan in place in case the worst happens. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but certainly we know that we can have some significant losses in our communities this year. We know across the board that our schools experience loss on a regular school year. So now, coupled with this pandemic, we're going to have people who get sick. And I pray to God that we don't have people who do die, but that may be something that we have to come across. So we've created resources, and you can reach out to me for those, about crisis plans, about virtual postvention response, how to handle all of that type of stuff. It promotes overall wellness. This really comes from a place of, hey, let's all wear our masks because we have a role to play here in the wellness, in taking care of the wellness of each other and taking care of our friends. It reduces rumor control. You have those parents at the table already, so they're informing you of rumors going on in your school community. You're informing those parents of what you're doing already as administrators or as faculty and staff, so that parents don't feel like they're left in the dark. A parent comes to you and says, hey, I don't think you guys are thinking about this. No, our administration already has, here's the plan in place, and everybody knows the same exact things to say, so there's consistency. That's support, control, and structure at its finest. My 3 favorite words. There's a consistent message coming across from your school community as to how you're handling these issues. You provide a supportive and caring school and community climate. I know a lot of people are concerned about their child getting COVID, and they get over it, they come back to school, nobody wants to be their friend anymore, or they're getting invited less places now, or nobody wants to kind of be around them because COVID has become the new cooties. How do we reduce that kind of stigma that goes along with this illness at this point? I have experience with a family who, now they have somebody and nobody wants to hang out with their kid anymore because they've gotten it and they've gotten over, and it's been a good couple of weeks now at this point, and how to make sure that that kid doesn't feel bullied or isolated or become, depressed or anything at this point in the school year just because he went through this illness. We reduce conflict between parents and schools. I kind of already mentioned that a little bit, but when everybody's included at the table, everybody feels like they have a piece to share, so there's really less conflict there. It fosters a sense of respect that allows for all key stakeholders to feel cared for. And again, it goes back to this idea that we're all in this circus together. We're just in different boats. This is a storm that we're all weathering, and we are all, going through it at different phases in our own lives with our families at home. So how do we foster and engage a competent, caring community? You're going to have different liaisons, right? So there's different pieces. And what I like about this model is it really doesn't reinvent the wheel. It fits nicely into your crisis team models already. That's one of the reasons why we had done it the way that we did, specifically when we were only addressing postvention and loss by death, in schools. So you have an administrative liaison. As part of your crisis team, your crisis team should be meeting on average like a good 3 to 4 times a year to run through some tabletop scenarios. And, you're coming up with situations that may seem a little wild, but, maybe they are something as such as a pandemic or, a bus crash or something like that, and how your school would run through that response so that everybody's ready and prepared. You have a faculty wellness group and support. You have your faculty liaison there. So, one of the things that I've spoken with other schools about is, they have sunshine clubs or other, faculty-based clubs, and just kind of building off of those and having a faculty liaison that kind of reports to your administrative crisis team. They tell you kind of the culture and climate that's going on with your faculty. You guys stay informed there. And then you infuse some really good self-care activities into that club or into whatever that is. And, in another training that I did previously with Susan, either that's a formal way, actually through your school and at your school or something that your school supports, or it's something informally that the teachers take on their own and do for themselves. It's something as simple as, a TV club or a book club. Maybe there's walks that they go, socially distanced walks that they go on every Saturday on the weekends. But, one school I worked with created, for the whole, next couple of months that they're in school, there's a theme for every month. September is walk month. October is let's try to eat healthy month. All different types of, themes that the faculty has come up with themselves. That's the important piece, that they really, engage in that. It's much more effective that way. Parent virtual information nights. I know that a lot of parents have the questions right now, is back to school going to be virtual? Is orientation going to be virtual? What types of things are going to be going on throughout the year? And I use my parent liaison to tell me, hey, what is it that my parents are worried about, right now? Do you think this is something that maybe a 45-minute meeting, could handle? I could speak to it. I can bring in this outside speaker. I can do, different things here and there. One of the things that I'm planning on doing is hopefully having an information night where, parents would typically come to our school to learn about, graduation options and moving on to high school, or even some of the college kids, moving on to colleges. We would have that in person, an information session, but now we have to plan to have that virtually. So I'm already coming up with a calendar with my parent liaison to kind of determine, some topics that parents may want to hear about. And that's how you engage your parents, right? You ask them what it is that they need. I've seen a lot of school districts really put out some awesome, surveys to their parents about what their concerns are. Okay, you're going to pick all virtual options. What challenges do you see ahead? Is it the internet? Is it having enough tablets? Is it how stressed you are? How can we help? Reminding them that we're all in this together. That's how you get the parent engagement. Student voices, we're going to promote voice and choice. Social emotional learning specific to COVID-19, right? We have a complete K through 8 social emotional learning curriculum that Maureen and I have written. Maureen, I, and Marnie presented. It's completely recorded. There's a whole curriculum workbook that goes along with that. About 10 lessons that address very COVID specific social emotional learning. Handouts are ready for you in there. And the great thing about it is it's ready to go whether you're in a remote only situation or if you are teaching in person. It speaks to kind of those things that kids need at this point, the school connectedness and the community, that sense of community that they've lost the past 6 months by not being in school, reinforcing those things. We can still be together, although we're socially distanced. What about informal ways that you communicate with your students? For me, my biggest regret in going, to the virtual route is there were a lot of kids that really never made it to my office. And we would have conversations in the hallways about things that they needed, or sometimes we would have conversations in the cafeteria. I had a lot of kids who were not comfortable with the stigma of going to the counselor's office. So sometimes, I could catch them walking in the hallway and we could pretend like we were just talking about something else, but we'd do a quick check-in. When we went to remote, those kids didn't know how to access me. So that was really something that I was concerned about and I had a regret about, and I would really have liked to been able to see them a little bit more often. I was certainly able to see my frequent flyers. They knew how to get to me right away. They knew my email address. Their parents knew how to contact me on the phone. And I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about the COVID-19 curriculum. And when we end this, as Marnie's saying, it's all on the Eventbrite page. You can download them right there. You know, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, maybe some housekeeping stuff at the end. But there's also, you know, if you guys are interested, a 45-minute educator self-care training, which really takes your educators on how to take care of themselves in returning to their classrooms. And that followed some of the suggestions from the New Jersey Department of Education in making sure that faculty has social emotional learning as well, that really helps them take care of themselves. That's all on the Eventbrite page. And that was another training that was brought to you, you know, myself, and then Susan Talone, who is the clinical director of the Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide and part of this collaborative grant. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so COVID crisis plans. How do we respond to COVID-related events? You know, like I said before, the Competent Community builds upon your already established crisis team. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's not creating more work. We certainly have enough work on our plates as educators to begin with. It plans for the need to respond in remote scenarios. Like I said at the end of this, if you are interested in that virtual post-vention response kind of layout, I have that. I have that as a template that's ready to go. It addresses and trains crisis teams for specific COVID-related scenarios. So again, meeting with your crisis team when things kind of calm down and say, like, what are we going to do if there's a COVID contagion here? How are we going to handle that, from, you know, the practicalness of opening the school building down to the social emotional needs of our anxious students who are really, you know, worried that they may have it. What do we do if we do lose a faculty or a staff member? What do we do if we lose a student? How do we allow our kids to grieve? You know, certainly before, you know, the recommendation was always having care stations, but what does a care station look like socially distanced? It's not something that really makes sense. So these are things that we proactively need to think about in preparing our students for the reality, with the hopes that it never happens. What about the potential need to return to remote learning? This is something that we talked about extensively on one of our other webinars. I'll just bring up briefly, is creating a red light for our students and having that conversation early. You know, having teachers ask their kids, hey, if we needed to go back to a remote only scenario, what challenges would that bring up for you? Let those kids answer that question. Me as the teacher, how could I help those challenges? What are things that you need? Getting all that information ahead of time. And then if that does happen and the kids are panicking in your classrooms, you say to them, hey guys, we prepared for this. We talked for this. This is how you build resiliency in kids. You prepare them as much as possible, not to shield them from the bump in the road, right? But to get them to get ready to put those seatbelts on so that they're not flying all over the car when they hit that bump. All right, next. Moving right along. All right, the first day back to school. If you know this movie, go ahead and say it in the chat. I know one person on here who's going to know what this movie is, but this is kind of how I imagine my first day back to school. Yes, it is Mean Girls. Thank you for knowing that. If you know this movie, you know exactly what's going to happen. This is how I imagine my middle schoolers, at least, coming back into schools. You have people fighting in the corner. You have girls up top crying. At one point, there's a boy who calls his mom and says, Mom, I need you to come get me because I am so afraid of what's going on here in school. How are we going to stop our kids from not hugging somebody they haven't seen in 6 months? You know, your heart almost breaks for them to think like that we're going to have conversations like this. You know, there are going to be some kids who see faculty for the first time that have really been their trusted adults. You know, you guys are in K-8 buildings. These people have known them, you know, most of their adolescent life. And to see that person for the first time and not be brought to tears, you know, how are we going to support them in this first 24 hours back to school? It's something that we really need to consider and think about, you know, you too, guys, as counselors and as teachers, how you're going to handle that. You know, somebody brought up to me the other day, how are you going to console kids in your office? And for however practical that question was, I was like, wow, I really can't do some of the things that I would do, especially with my younger kids, that I might do last year. And this brings me, you know, to our next point, which is preparing for the first 24 hours. Let's talk about, for school counselors and school support staff people on this training, let's reassess your office. What is practical anymore? Anybody who knows me knows that I am a big, you know, supporter of kinetic sand. I frequently have kinetic sand in my office, and even the most resistant child, you give them that kinetic sand for about 2 to 3 minutes and they are telling you all of their life's problems. I can't use that anymore. That's not an option for me this year in counseling a lot of my kids. So I have to get creative into using some of these, you know, techniques that I've trusted for so many years, and how do I replace them? You know, conflict management, a lot of what we do, two students in an office with you, what does that look like with social distance guidelines? You know, you used to sit at a table and half of it was that the kid could see how the other child was affected, right? You saw on their face, maybe you saw some tears. Kids are now going to be wearing masks. Is conflict mediation going to be as meaningful, you know, behind masks? Or if you have to space them out where one kid is on one side of the office, you're in the middle, and then somebody's on the complete other side, you know, does that really take away from those physical and emotional cues that those kids pick up on during, you know, a lot of the theories that we use in counseling? What about sanitization? You know, if your office is anything like mine, you know, I have one kid, and now I'm going to have to, you know, one kid comes in, sanitize the desk, out. One kid comes in, sanitize, you know, and it's certainly going to create a backup. So what are you guys planning to, you know, reassess the practical needs of being a counselor as we return back to school? Think about it ahead of time. New contact documents. Maureen talked about this a little bit. And, you know, what happens? You're in a virtual session with a kid and they just log off, and you have that gut feeling, you know, having that plan in place. You know, I've had situations like this happen where, you know, a kid is kind of logged off, you know, pretty quickly, and I was concerned, but fortunately, you know, I knew to have my contact documents right next to me during all my sessions. I immediately called mom. She picked up the phone. We had a conversation. She checked on the wellness of the kid. We continued to monitor that child's safety, and I felt good about it. I could sleep at night. You know, I don't know if I hadn't had that, how good I would have felt. You know, maybe I would have ended up calling the police for a wellness check, or I might have been calling the hospital. But, you know, as we move forward, some of the best practice things that I've been hearing is, you know, you get the kid's phone number, you get the parent's number, you get a backup emergency number. You explain to the family that I will try this person first, I will try the emergency person first, but, you know, if there's a situation where I can't get anybody on the phone, I'm either calling the police for a wellness check, or I'm calling the nearest hospital to make sure that, you know, this kid is going to be okay. How will students be referred to your office? Think ahead of time. Do you need a different plan? You know, I have a lot of kids who come to my office in between, you know, that 3 minutes that they have to switch classes. They come downstairs, they get a pass from me. I inform their teacher that they're in my office. They're not moving classes this year. So you're going to have a kid who's going to be uncomfortable raising their hands in the middle of an 8-hour day where they're in the classroom with all of their friends to ask for, you know, a minute to go see the counselor. You know, kids are already shy about admitting that they come down to the counselor, and it's a little bit of a stigma of, you know, seeking out help, right? So thinking about creative ways that we can change our referral process to make sure that kids really get the care that they need while they're in school. That's for kids who are actually in their school buildings, right? What about students who are in virtual learning? You know, we're so focused on everybody returning to the school building that are you going to have time on day one to check in with the kids who are still in virtual learning? I think, you know, one of the things that we were talking about, you know, this collaborative group between that, you know, parents primarily, especially for the K through 8, made the decision for these kids as to whether or not they were returning to school. And you're going to have some kids who are going to be really angry at their parents about that. You know, they want to be with their friends. They don't want to be isolated. I mean, think about middle school. They're going to miss out on that full 8-hour day. They're going to miss out on inside jokes. They're going to get taken out of group chats. They're going to really miss out on some things. And so how are you making sure that those kids still feel like a piece of your school? They still have that sense of connectedness when they're not physically in the classroom with the rest of their students and their peers. All right, so I want to hear from you guys again. We're going to do a little bit of a poll. So what does counseling look like with COVID restrictions? I think Marnie's going to join us again and put up our poll. But what challenges do you anticipate with counseling now that we have these COVID-19 restrictions in schools? You know, are you worried about missing physical cues due to virtual learning, wearing a mask, increased difficulty in collaboration with your colleagues? You can't access your teachers as often as you would like to, or as you did in previous years. If there's any other challenges that aren't listed here, go ahead and, you know, just let me know in the chat. Confidentiality, yeah. We'll talk about that one too.
They're about halfway there. We'll give them 10 seconds.
10 seconds, all right. Up here on my tightrope walk.
You're balancing really, really well.
Students not connecting virtual. Okay.
All of the above. 2 people now quickly threw in all of the above. It's a lot, Nicole, this tightrope walk. All right.
Yep. All right, let's see what we got. Missed physical cues due to being virtual or wearing a mask. Yeah, we had a lot of this, and this was something that we talked about, previously on even our social emotional learning curriculum. You guys will see in there, my good ringleader over here, Marnie, kind of goes into, some best practices for making sure, especially I see somebody wrote in here, you're a year 1 school. And we had a webinar earlier this week for high school and how you're engaging with kids who are now new to your school. You don't know them at all as freshmen, but especially, K through 8. Now you might not know some of those kids either, and how are you reaching out to them? How are you building that rapport when either maybe they're not coming to school at all, or, they are in person, but they've never seen your face. And one of the suggestions that Marnie really made was like, let's get some really big name tags that have your picture on it so the kids know it's you. Again, going back to my own anxiety as a student, I almost never called the teacher by her first name because I just could swear in my mind that I was still going to get it wrong, even though this had been my teacher all year. Now imagine having a kindergartner have to go up to your kindergarten teacher and say their name, but they're looking at you like, I don't really know who you are. I had experienced this week seeing some of my own students and even kids that I've known for years and years and years, there's been a lot of growth and maturity, like just physically, in height and weight and, facial changes from not seeing them for the past 6 months. And so I would look at them and I'd be like, is that you? And they'd be like, yeah. And then sometimes I'd get it wrong and sometimes I get it right. But, especially now we got these kids with these little faces and these big masks, and it's really hard to pick up on who it is. Inability to use physical therapeutic resources. That's really getting me too, you guys. Figuring out new things to do. And what I'm trying to do as much as possible is speak to my, administration about, what types of sanitation things I can use on things. I know that I got to lose the sand this year, which absolutely just kind of kills me. But, coming up with some other ways, like even if I get, cheap dollar store Play-Doh that I replace, more frequently than I would have before, I need something to kind of get these kids to open up, especially, developmentally, the younger groups of kids. So I'm reading some of these things. Small group counseling is definitely going to be a challenge, making sure that they stay away from each other, they stay socially distanced, they keep their masks on, making sure that you have small group activities that are engaging. It's really reminding me as counselors here, we're all kind of in this circus together. And, I would really encourage you to see that social emotional learning curriculum, that you can take some of those activities and infuse into small group curriculums, because we've really thought hard about that, whether or not we are going to be able to do group activities. But knowing that kids, especially in this age group, need group activities in order to thrive and in order to develop and, to address some of these social behavioral concerns that we have. All right, so the first 24 hours, guys, here we are. We're going back to school. So I've broken it down into 3 groups. You got your students, your faculty, and your parents. But what I want to bring up, especially, for our public schools, you guys are going to have 2 first days, right? So if you're in a hybrid situation, you got kids coming back, I don't know, letters A through K, and then the rest of the on Monday, and then you got the rest of the alphabet on Tuesdays. You're going to have to go through this twice. And so the reason I bring that up is because I'm really worried about us with burnout, right? So the first 24 hours is going to be hard enough as it is. You walk out of that building at 3:30 if you're lucky enough, and then to know you got to turn around and come back and do the same thing all over again with a different group of kids the next day, it is definitely challenging. So some of the suggestions that I have, some of the things that have been working for us. Alice, thank you. Coming through, can the students have their own bag of sands with their name on it? I'm going to do that. Kudos to Alice. I wish I could give you a thumbs up down there, but thank you. Yes, I think that that's an excellent idea. If we can have, pieces of that where I can have it for my kids, that's definitely meaningful. So, again, here, we are all in the circus together, and you guys are really coming up with meaningful, ways that we can continue to support our kids and use counseling modalities that really are effective. Students, so we're going to update our virtual counseling classroom with resources for both your in-person and remote-only students. And I say this because that speaks to the regret that I had originally, right? So I want to educate both kind of sets of kids. The kids who are already at home, I want them to know how to access me when I'm in my school building. But the kids who are in person, I'm going to make a point, when I do go in and I do push into those classrooms for some learning, to remind them, hey, here's my virtual counseling classroom or my website. Here's how, if we did go to remote only, or even if you were at home, you could access me while you were there. And hopefully it increases that help-seeking behavior amongst my kids in my school building. I want to make it visible for all students to know my referral process and how they can reach me, right? That's certainly something that's going to need to change. And I want kids to know that from day one, they walk into that building, how they can get access to the school counselor. Faculty, you're going to really start to utilize that faculty liaison to promote faculty and staff wellness starting day one, right? We are all so concerned. You guys have brought it up several times. The burnout of parents. We have a lot of faculty members in our school who are parents themselves. Our faculty members are going to be worn out that first day, remembering that we do have two first 24 hours. So how are you taking care of your staff? Think about that now. It could be something as, simple as, I don't know, a quick meeting at the end of the day. I don't know that we can bring people together, but even if you encourage that faculty liaison to think about how we can reinforce some self-care into that first day back into school when that school day ends for our faculty, that's going to be critical. Preparing and drafting an email with resources to help teachers following the stress of the first day, something that I had done, pretty quickly after we went into a school shutdown situation and we realized we wouldn't be going back to school within that first 2-week period. I started sending out weekly self-care check-ins to all of my faculty and staff. And it was a lot of mindful activities, a lot of jokes in there, a lot of coming up for air, things that you guys have in this workbook. I would ask questions, and they would be questions that didn't relate at all to school days. So, what is your favorite memory from your childhood? What is a song that brings back, some really great memories? We had a very long, whole school, chain going between my faculty and staff about songs that people would do. And I would have staff members saying to me, I remember singing this song into my hairbrush in my parents' bathroom when I was little, and people laughing and just saying, wow, that was really something that I needed to do. I came up for air, so-and-so reminded me of the song. That was what I used to dance with my dad to. A lot of people realized they had shared wedding songs and things. And it was just a way to, again, create that school connectedness that didn't have to do with school. So that was a great self-care that I really started immediately. And, I plan on continuing as we move into the school year now. Parents, updating your website with returning to school resources, information on talking to your children about returning to school during COVID. I've already started to do this, giving my parents some resources in the community. If you guys, are Monmouth County based and would like some of those, you can always email me, after this training as well. But there's a lot of resources going on right now from some really good counseling places on, some small social virtual groups that are talking about, wearing masks all day, for kids you may be concerned about, but just having that information ahead of time. And, one of the things that I'm planning on doing and really resonated with our first high school group was this idea of sending information directly to parents before school begins on school counseling, the social emotional learning that you're going to be doing, and how to gain access to you. I actually had one of the school counselors in the high school area reach out to me afterwards saying how motivated she was to come back to her office the next day and write a letter to her incoming 9th grade freshman introducing herself so that they knew how to access her. And she really felt like she was taking a proactive approach to reaching those kids. Whether they read the letter or not, she really felt, good about contacting parents. And this can be something that you do through, your school's instant alert system or email communication where everybody gets it. And now everybody's informed on how to reach out for help if they need it for themselves or for their kids. So the next 48 hours, guys, this is assuming that we got through the first 24, right? So you're going to sit with your administrative or your COVID crisis team and relay any important information related to student well-being. And this just goes back to best practices, right? So you had a kid who really struggled to get through the whole school day. Either your teacher was referring him down to you, the para was referring down to you, the special teachers had him, kind of marked. This is information sharing, going back to FERPA, where you really want to share in the best interest of the kid and just kind of making sure that everybody's on the same page. And, early communication with parents is going to be key here. You know, you don't want to get, 2 or 3 weeks into, a school situation where you've had a kid who's really taken that chronic stress and built up some trauma and has a trauma response to anxiety, where now they're having panic attacks about coming to school. You're going to prepare to support faculty and staff after the first few days of learning. We just talked about that on a couple of slides, but really get creative and engage that faculty liaison. Begin check-ins with remote students and families to offer support. So one of the things that I'm planning to do is take my list of kids who have opted out of in-person learning and schedule appointments to meet the family and the students virtually, and just kind of introduce myself, whether it be a 5-minute conversation and then I may never see them again, or it's a conversation that may be longer and may be, somebody that I put on my schedule to check in with weekly. Maintaining a record or process for students who become truant or school avoidant. You want that information early. As we all know, early intervention is the best. You've learned some best practices from Dr. Strobel here tonight on how to do them and how to engage them in a virtual learning scenario. So just making sure that somebody on your crisis team is monitoring who's checking into virtual classes, who's not showing up at all, what that process is. Does it fall on your teachers to reach out? Does it fall on the school counselor? Is it something that maybe, your secretaries do in the very beginning, just in terms of validating attendance? But having that plan in place, sooner rather than later is going to be better, so that you're not going into October realizing that little Johnny hasn't logged in more than twice for 20 minutes since the beginning of school. And also, you're going to reassess. You're going to consider the need to change your plans. Did your referral process work? You thought you had a great idea, but you didn't really use it and it didn't work with the kids. And so now you need a new plan. Were there any unexpected issues that need to be addressed that you didn't think of before? Coming back to the table and building that into your crisis plan. Crisis plans are ever changing and evolving. They're a working document. They should never ever stay the same. So always reassessing, and we're going to have to do that more frequently than we would have before, especially with the changing nature of COVID. So we've made it this far. We've gotten through the first 24 to 48 hours, and here's my little friend Zoltan, right? He predicts the future. He's a psychic, but we all aren't. So will we even be here next week? So how do we prepare for a future we don't know yet? Stay informed. One of the things on our other training that Susan and I spoke a lot about was making sure that you only worry about your own school district, especially now with the new guidelines that, Governor Murphy kind of put down yesterday. Everybody's going to be doing their own thing, and you need to kind of stay in your own lane and say, this is what my school building is doing. This is the reason why we're doing it. The town may be doing a different plan, but that's what they felt were the needs of their students and their families. And so staying informed and in your lane is going to help you reduce the risk of burnout. Being prepared, having virtual counseling lessons ready to go. So I know, if we come to a, scenario where we have to return to remote only learning, there's going to be so much chaos and things going on that I'm going to be needed on the front lines. And so I'm not going to have time to record some lessons for when I need to push in through my K-8 classes. So I've already started to pre-record those so that the teachers can upload them to their virtual classrooms. And I got a good 2-week lead on, needing to re-record them so I can really focus on, supporting the crisis team and my administration as much as possible. Having a virtual counseling session platform ready. Again, those letters ahead of time to your students, making sure they know how to access you should the need come. That decreases your anxiety, that decreases the kids' anxiety. We're better prepared. Taking care of yourself and coming up for air, how you're going to do that. I would, already start to think about some ways, that first day back to school, what you're going to do afterwards to kind of take care of yourself. Processing the first week. Another thing, if you guys know anything about me, or any of my friends who may be on this chat, is I am a huge Peanuts fan. Everything that I have is pretty much Snoopy themed. And I knew right away when we were talking about the first week back to school, this comic with Charlie Brown just popped right into my head. I don't know about you guys, but I am already tired tomorrow. This is a big undertaking that we're coming up to in this school year. And it's certainly going to take all of our energy, but it is good work that we are doing. It is meaningful work that we are doing. We are really shaping how our kids respond to this historical event that they are going through, and we are rising to the challenge. We are giving them, the pieces that they need. Just by being here tonight, you guys are taking a minute to make sure that you are well informed on things that can benefit your kids. And I really thank you guys for being here tonight and educating yourselves on some of these best practices, to return to school.
Wow. Thank you, Nicole. Nicole's email address is up there on the top there. And if you aren't able to jot that down, maybe she'll throw it in the chat for you. So you have it afterwards. She's great at sharing her resources. You know, Nicole, you took us safely through a lot of information and you are an expert tightrope walker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Marnie.
You're welcome. All right. So we're almost done with our clowns. We've just got one additional clown break before we move into the home stretch. This clown break is, my sister read somewhere that if you look into your own eyes long enough in a mirror, you change into the devil. And it took her almost 30 years, but she finally did it. So to wrap things up today, we are going back to rig number 1 for our juggler, Maureen Underwood. Maureen's going to bring us home with some really important ideas about looking forward, taking care of yourself, and the future. While she does that, I will be putting the evaluation in the chat, so it's handy for you when she's done. We are going to endeavor to finish on time. We might run 1 or 2 minutes late, but I will have that ready for you. Take it away, Maureen.
All right, just a second. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, all right, because I was going to start juggling again.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. So we've spent so much time talking about the present tonight, and I think most of us are really kind of worried about what's going to happen in the next day, and we feel like we're in an eternal Groundhog Day. It really does feel like February the 2nd. So we want to do at the very end, just do a little recalibration and looking ahead and try to remember a few things. For some kids, virtual school has been a really good thing. We don't want to get caught up in the negativity of feeling like everybody was, it was a lose for everyone. And so you want to ask all of your kids, how was that virtual experience for you? What about it was what worked, what didn't work? It's especially important, as you heard Nicole talk about having that plan for going back, that you're really going to know you have to have a stoplight or a red light plan that says you may go back to virtual at any time. So you want kids to be able to predict what's going to be challenging for them, and they can then come up with some strategies to deal with it. We know that when people are in crisis, your role as a counselor is to become more active. Oftentimes when people just come in to talk with us, we can simply do that ventilation validation and they walk and they go out. But when kids are in crisis, often what you have to do is begin to give them some alternatives. You have to reinforce some of that problem solving that's gone out of the window because of the impact of that cortisol on their brain chemicals. So you want to recognize that this may be a time when you give more suggestions, especially to parents, because as you know, they're sort of at the end of the line, really, and they haven't even started yet. So you want to be prepared to give them some ideas. Make "you are not alone" more than a cliche. When you look through that curriculum, you'll see we give lots and lots of suggestions of trying to do social connections, not just with the class, but with the school and then the larger community. Lots of people talk about this, you are not alone. Let the kids get engaged. As Nicole said, they are the most underutilized resource in your school, and even little kids have great ideas. The thing that's important to know is that the projected depression rate usually in the adult population is between 18 to 20%. The projected rate that we're coming up to with COVID is about 33%. And most people will need support, but not therapy. And we all may be in that 33%. So let's talk a little bit about what we can do to take better care of ourselves. You remember how we talked about how stress affected your brain and how basically it was not the most useful in terms of assisting us in brain functioning. However, I want you to consider the fact that, there are some things that happen in our brains that really do help us. we talk a lot about that concept of mindfulness. I mean, you've heard about it for years, I'm sure. And it can sound like you have to be very intentional to do mindfulness. And while certainly there are things you do that you have to be intentional to have a positive impact, there are some activities that have no degree of thoughtfulness. You just do them, and our body takes care of us in a very, very subtle way that gives us bursts of positive feelings. So that's what we want to end on tonight. What's some of those bursts of positive feelings you can do as soon as you get out of this webinar? So oxytocin is the love hormone, and how you can activate it. It almost looks like my dog there. We want to say that you could play with the dog, or you could let the dog play with you. Hugging, hugging babies, hugging children, hugging someone you care about, holding hands is one way to get some oxytocin, and giving somebody a compliment, as simple as saying, wow, you did a good job. You get a reward in your brain chemistry. Dopamine is that reward chemical in our brain, and how you can get some more of that is really by completing a task. Even if it's a little task and it's only a little piece of a task, just feeling like you finished something can give you a shot of oxytocin. Doing self-care. You'll notice the self-care I have on here is someone who's doing meditation, which is a very intentional self-care, and you got somebody else who's sleeping with his dog, taking a nap. That's a great self-care too. And eating food. And one food in particular that will give you a blast of dopamine is ice cream. So put that on your menu. Serotonin is the mood stabilizer, and you can activate that by meditating. Definitely can do that. You can do it by exercising, running, but also just being in the sunshine, just sitting outside and getting some of that vitamin D, walking in nature. And you'll notice this is a group that looks kind of socially distant. They're not walking all together. Swimming. These are a little bit more intentional activities, but will move you to endorphins, which are painkillers, and these don't take much work at all. So one of the ways to activate those endorphins is by laughing. And even if you just kind of have a half smile, a little half smile, get some of those endorphins going in your brain and you can feel a little bit better. But that's why you want to watch cheesy movies, tell silly jokes. Kids can find lots of things to laugh at, and they can make us laugh at a lot too. Essential oils really do activate some of those endorphins in our brain. So there's a reason to have that lavender, that eucalyptus. My favorite, of course, is eating dark chocolate, which is at the bottom of the page, and exercising. And, as I said, the other exercise was pretty difficult. Here I have something that won't strain you very much. You can just do that. But these are things that can help you feel better. So I would like to encourage all of you, think about this silly list and go do one of these very simple things at the end of it. You may just go and laugh at us because we look like clowns. That's enough. We don't care. We laugh at ourselves a lot too. And at that note, I'm going to tell you that the circus is over for today. We want to thank you for coming. We hope when we do some more of these, you'll come back because we'll have more acts, and Marnie is going to tell you about that stuff.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Maureen. Yep, so we are done. We're wrapping it up. We have one last gift for you in that Come Up for Air, and this is really from our hearts to yours tonight. These are little packets of light, and you need to plant them early in the year. And remember to mark where they were, because lots of times they look like weeds in the beginning, and it's not until later that you see how beautiful they really are. And we know you're going out and planning ideas for your schools and for your children and for your families, and we appreciate what you do. And we do what we do to support you in doing what you do, and we appreciate you joining us today. So the link for the evaluation is there in the chat. Please do it. It's important for you to do for your own benefit, for your CE. It's important for us so we know how we did, what we can do better, and what else you want from us. That Eventbrite site, if you didn't get it from me yet, I just can't put it in this chat for some reason right now, but email me and I will. My email address is right there. Email me and I'll send you the link for that. The recording of this webinar will be there, as well as Tuesdays and the other ones we've done over the past month or so. Thank you so much for joining us. I think that's it from us. We can take a final bow, and thank you very much for coming. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good year at the circus.
Have a great year.
Yes, have a great year. Stay safe.
Bye all.
You got this, everybody. Well.